Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. This is the Hillsdale Dialogue. That music signifies the last broadcast hour of the week, which is always spent with either Dr. Larry Arnn or one of his colleagues at Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale found at hillsdale.edu. We have been spending most of this year in and out of the first volume of Winston Churchill's World War II memoirs, The Gathering Storm. And when last we spoke about this 2 weeks ago, Dr. Arnn, Munich had happened, and the disaster had befallen, and now we are into the chapter entitled Munich Winter, as the Czechs bow to the inevitable. And I find myself again and again discovering things I did not know. I did not know that the Poles acted dishonorably at that time. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I've read this book and some others.
Yeah.
You know, it's a mess, right? Britain and France are the powers that can resist Germany, and it would prove later that the Soviet Union was such a power too, but they're about to get into cahoots with Germany for a while. And so Britain and France really enabled Hitler to take Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia had the means to resist, not the sufficient means, but serious means. And so but their allies went and made a deal, more or less without talking to them. And so now they're broken, right? Well, Hungary and Poland, the two nations that offended the most in this thing, seized territory from Czechoslovakia. The Slovaks, it's now the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and they're friendly. But in those days, there was friction between them, and the Slovaks helped Hitler some. And then he takes the place over, and it's, there's a feast on, right? There's some territory to take. And so Poland took some, and Hungary took some, and they paid for it later, big time. And Hitler didn't mind it a bit because he was going to eventually take both of those places and was probably thinking of it at the time. Now,
Churchill writes this in 1948, and about the Poles he writes, all our hearts, so it's the Iron Curtain has come down, Poland is under the boot of Joseph Stalin, and Churchill writes, in 1948, all our hearts are with the Polish people in their new subjugation, and we are sure that we will never seek in vain for their perennial impulse to strike against tyranny and to suffer with the invincible fortitude all the agonies which befall them. We look forward to the dawn. Now, he writes that in 1948. You know the record as well as anyone. Was he optimistic about that?
Well, Churchill was optimistic in this way. He thought communism wouldn't work. Sooner or later, it was going to collapse. And he thought, therefore, but it was militarily extremely formidable. I mean, superior, really. And once the nuclear balance was achieved, that it was the only thing that stopped the Soviet Union after the Second World War from being able to take all of it was that the disaster of nuclear war would be so great that it would cripple everybody. But they had the means apart from that. And so what Churchill thought was the thing to do was to be ready and to be armed, to preserve the nuclear shield, and to have enough defense so that any conventional war would be very formidable to them, and then wait them out, because it's bound to fail. Now, poor Poland, and see, Churchill has a history with Poland. Churchill is used by this guy, Darrell Cooper, of getting Britain into the war over Poland, but that's just a simple date problem. He wasn't in power at the time. Found it breathtaking that Chamberlain gave that guarantee, having let Czechoslovakia go. He didn't oppose that. It was done anyway. But he thought it was curious. Anyway, in 1944, Poland is carved up by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939. And then the Polish government is in exile in London. And they were throughout the war. And Churchill met with them many times. And in 1944, Churchill is urging them, because after the Battle of Stalingrad, which was in 43, the Soviets are coming, right? They're mighty now. They've got a bigger tank army than we do. They've got a larger army than we and the British put together, much larger than the German. And they're taking up territory, and Churchill is urging them to, and this is opposite to this charge by Darrell Cooper, because it's so close to the opposite of what he accuses Churchill of. And he says you should give the Soviet Union, you should make a deal with them right now. Yesterday would be better, he said. And the transcripts of this are published in the Churchill biography, in the volumes of which I am the editor. And he says you should give them some territory in the East and promise them that you won't have any hostile foreign policy toward them. And we will give you some land in the West at the expense of Germany, and you'll be made whole. And everybody will agree to this deal, and then maybe it will hold. And Michalewski, the prime minister in exile, says, but you and the United States have major forces in Europe now. Isn't now the time to have a showdown? And Churchill replies in a transcript that's published, it's lunacy to think that we will fight the Soviet Union over Poland. So the point is, what can you do, right? And what Churchill believed was, in the long term, if we keep ourselves in order, we will prove the superior system, and they will decline. And that is what happened. But
that is what happened. I'm just marveling. It was 41 years until Poland would become free, but he's writing in 1948 about 1989 that we look forward to the dawn. And the dawn came. He didn't live to see it, but the dawn came. Back to the immediate aftermath of Neville Chamberlain returning from Munich. It divides the conservatives in ways I did not know. And Churchill writes, the issue is not one to be settled by cheering crowds which had welcomed Mr. Chamberlain back from the airport or blocked Downing Street in its approaches, and not by the redoubtable exertions of the ministerial whips and partisans. I guess that means that they whipped the vote to try and get the anti-appeasers into line. But Duff Cooper quits, and we've talked about him before in this, and Churchill says that I well remember that when I said we have sustained a total and unmitigated defeat, the storm which met me made it necessary to pause before resuming. My question to you, Dr. Arnn, as a Churchill scholar, when he said that, did his saying that make it inevitable that he would have to succeed Neville Chamberlain as opposed to the men of Munich? Not Eden, not even Duff Cooper. They had been appeasement people for a while, but he was always against it. And after Munich, he stood up and said, a total and unmitigated defeat. Did that make it inevitable that he'd have to take over when Churchill stormed through France?
Well, of course, that happened before, and his becoming prime minister happens later. And it reminds me of a quote attributed to Dan Quayle. That's inevitable, but it could change. The answer is, Churchill, you asked me in a note, why not Duff Cooper or Eden?
Yep.
They were both very brave people, and they were excellent people, both. Duff Cooper, a very colorful man, by the way, a gambler, a drinker, a philanderer, a war hero, highly decorated, a very able public servant. He was, There were people in the court of Queen Elizabeth rather like him. I mean, Elizabeth the First.
And pretty much, I think it's true, Dr. Arnn can confirm it, that everyone with whom Churchill was really friends, including Duff Cooper, is a remarkable human being. Now, they had all of the human foibles they had, but they also almost all had remarkable courage and resilience and stamina that comes through that when he peopled his government for the Long War, which gets started in 1939, he just picks people like Duff Cooper. And more on that coming up. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. This is the Hillsdale Dialogue, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. I'll be right back.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding. And we want you, or your son or daughter, to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. We went from talking about Duff Cooper. Now let's get back to this remarkable speech that Churchill delivers after the Munich Agreement, and he's decidedly not, I think he's in a minority here, Dr. Arnn.
Well, first of all, this speech is one of the greatest speeches Churchill ever gave or anybody ever gave. It's very beautiful. There's a passage we should read from it in a minute. But it's... he just had a power, right, to explain and arrest. And that speech at that moment, in a nearby passage to this, he explains what happened when Chamberlain, what was happening to the Conservative Party, which is healthier today than it is today, because they were split, right? And Churchill was in the minority, thinking that it was entirely the wrong strategy. Duff Cooper thought that too. Well, people who'd been friends and social friends and colleagues, and Duff Cooper in particular, by the way, was a really fun guy at a dinner party. His son is John Julian Norwich, a historian of Venice, and I know him a bit. I've had lunch with him. And he's rather like his daddy in some ways. But he was a delightful man, and he did good service in Churchill's administration in the Second World War. But, people stopped talking to him and to Churchill. It's a little bit like the split over Trump in the Republican Party and the conservative movement. And I think that's, how it is.
On big issues, when there's a real divide. When there's a major issue on which there's a real divide and someone throws down like Churchill, what is the part that you want to read? Because I have a couple of lines here, but you know this speech better than I do.
Yeah, it's my pages are different than yours, but it's at the end. This is how he concludes the speech, which everybody, the whole House is against him. And they even think it's inappropriate. And remember, it is a sort of voice of doom, but also everybody proved that they agreed with this because Chamberlain turns his thoughts to rearmament soon after this, immediately after having proclaimed peace in our time. He says, wow, maybe I need some weapons. Should have thought of that 5 years earlier.
Yep.
I do not grudge our loyal, brave people who are ready to do their duty no matter what the cost, who never flinched under the strain of last week. The natural, spontaneous outburst of joy and relief when they learned that the hard ordeal would no longer be required of them at the moment. But they should know the truth. They should know that there's been, and listen to the cadence of Churchill, right? It's very, he's a good writer. They should know the truth. They should know that there has been gross neglect and deficiency in our defenses. They should know that we have sustained a total defeat without a war, the consequences of which will travel far along with us down our road. They should know that we have passed an awful milestone in our history. Remember, they should know. They should know. They should know. It makes it easy to listen to, see, and easy to follow. And you learn from Churchill, the first step in eloquence is clarity. When the whole equilibrium of Europe has been deranged, and that the terrible words have for the time being been pronounced against the Western democracy, now the Bible, thou art weighed in the balance and found wanting. And do not suppose that this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup. Now see, that's echoes of the play Macbeth.
Yep.
This even-handed justice commends the poisoned chalice to our own lips, says Macbeth, which we proffer to us year by year, unless, and now determination, by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor, we arise again and take our stand for freedom, as in the olden time. Isn't that lovely?
It is. And I wrote down one line, all is over, silent, mournful, abandoned, broken, Czechoslovakia recedes into darkness. It's almost of despair, but do we have recordings of him in the House, or only the speeches that he later recorded? No. Because then we wouldn't hear the bellowing of anger at him, in which, he forcefully moved through that bellowing of anger, which may have given even more force to his words.
Yeah,
Vote of confidence. Go ahead.
He was very commanding in the House, right? It is, in a way, it's good because we have accounts. Not only do we have the text of the speeches, the Hansard was verbatim, congressional record is not. But then, and partly because not everybody could listen, there are lots of eloquent people who write letters about what it was like, and Stanley Baldwin wrote some wonderful letters to the king about Churchill's abilities in the House of Commons. Here's a story. Churchill was good at whipping up the Labour Party when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer in the 1920s. And they shout at him, and he's an anti-socialist, and he ticks them off. And they would, one time, and Stanley Baldwin gives this account to the king, writing a letter, telling him what it was like. Churchill says, his voice could get big. He didn't talk fast. He had a lisp, slight lisp. He said, honorable members opposite may not wish to hear what I have to say, and if not, I do not wish to cast my pearls. Stanley Baldwin said that there was silence in the House as they leaned forward, waiting to be called swine, so they could scream at him again. Cast my pearls, long pause, for those who do not want them. And then everybody collapsed in laughter. So,
look, you got to be able to know a room. We don't really have orators anymore. Speech, he silenced them.
He could do that. And in the pattern of British politics in these days, it's, by the way, in my opinion, one of the ways that they saved the country, which they did by a bare whisker, and it cost to them to which they've never really fully recovered. But they weren't beaten by Hitler. And one of the reasons was the nature of this chamber. Churchill is eloquent on this subject. He loved this chamber where he gave this speech and so many others, because you could debate, and it was attended to. And the chamber, we've talked about this before, is smaller than standing room only when it's really important. And he would fill it up.
As often as you tell me that, Doctor, I think we should remind people that it's always more exciting when the room is jammed. Finest Hour, the movie with Gary Oldman, depicts this very well. But when the room is jammed, the Parliament is jammed, there's very little place and people are judged in there. It's sort of like every advanced man in America knows get as small a room as you know you can fill to overflowing. You don't want a big room that's empty. You want a small room filled to overflowing. More coming up on the Hillsdale Dialogue when we come back. Remember, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All of the prior segments in this series on Churchill's war memoirs can be found at hughforhillsdale.com. That's hughforhillsdale.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue underway with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. And he's been making the case about rearmament for a long time, I believe, Dr. Arnn.
One time in one of his great speeches earlier in the 30s, when he's making the case against the government policy of disarmament and then later tardy rearmament and eventually somewhat better rearmament by the skin of their teeth. He's finished his speech, and a conservative member stands up, and he's the next speaker. And the House is packed to hear Churchill. And remember, Churchill is in the minority in the Conservative Party. Chamberlain is Baldwin at that time, is still controlling, right? Most of the members are against Churchill, but he's the best show in town, right? And so he finishes his speech, and everybody starts screaming it out, and this conservative speaker stands up and says, so ends the last chapter of the Book of Lamentation. Churchill had been lamenting, right? And somebody calls out, followed, oddly enough, by the Book of Exodus, because everybody was leaving.
But now, I wanted to ask you, last week, Donald Trump was the MC at the Kennedy Honors. And I was not there. My son was there, and I'd spoken to other people who were there. And apparently, it will be shown on CBS some point certain down the road here in a couple of weeks during the Christmas holidays. He had command of the room. It's a giant room. You know, the Kennedy Center is not well made. He's doing his best to reclaim some of its physical structure. But in the course of this, it was as though the Oscars had found the long-lost Jimmy Stewart or Johnny Carter. He completely dominated the room because he's funny. That's a different style of rhetoric. We don't really have anyone, and I don't think we've had anyone since Lincoln who gave great speeches. FDR gave great fireside chats, and Nixon could give a speech, and Reagan could give a set-piece speech. But have we had a legislative speaker of the sort that Churchill was?
Well, our Congress has not worked that way for so long because they've delegated the legislative power. And I noticed in the breaks, those who are watching the visual of this TV radio show, that you have a beautiful picture of the Capitol been showing off and on today. It's a really good one. The Capitol is a monumental building and the only Washington, D.C. building that's actually at the scale of a great European. There it is. And the point is, we used to make all our laws in that building, and now we don't. And so that's too bad, right? And that means that they're not there, and they don't argue with each other. And in the Senate, you know, Webster and Hayne, John C. Calhoun was a heck of a debater. So there used to be in the 19th century some really great debates, not so many in the 20th.
There is a great exchange. The only one I can remember from recent years is Leader McConnell, when he was in the minority, warning Harry Reid, do not break the filibuster. You will rue the day you break the filibuster. And he went on at length about that. And it's the only memorable speech that I can recall. Now, John Thune got his licks in during the shutdown, and they were good, heavy hits to the jaw. And the Republicans won that. But in terms of one for the ages, McConnell warning Reid, I can listen to that again. Reid, of course, blew him off, and now we've got a 6-member majority Supreme Court because of Harry Reid. And good for McConnell for putting on the record. Back to this chapter. The vote of confidence on the Munich Accord went against Churchill, 366 to 144. Less than a year later, there was a war. I wanted to ask you, less than a year after we collapsed in Afghanistan, Putin lunged into Ukraine, and Hamas, 2 years later, invaded Israel. Do you think the parallels are there? Yeah,
well, sure. Despotic people, remember, if somebody is ruling by force at home, they're not unlikely to be willing to use force abroad. But they're not going to use it if they think they'll lose. And so weakness is a temptation to violence. And we look really weak. Not as much anymore.
Certainly not as much as we did under Joe Biden, who was himself just physically weak. But we saw that infirmity, but vis-a-vis Iran and the JCPOA. And after Operation Midnight Hammer, I don't think anybody thinks of America as being weak or lacking a president who will, if he is obliged to pull the trigger. And ISIS certainly got that message a couple of weeks ago. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn. All the prior episodes in this series at hughforhillsdale.com, hughforhillsdale.com. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest. We're talking about Winston Churchill and the arrival of World War II, or the imminence of World War II. And Dr. Arnn, you've been getting letters.
I have a friend who wrote me that he's upset about Trump and Hegseth talking about killing people in those boats. And I sent me a New York Times article written by a Marine, good article. And the Marine says it's dishonorable to be striking the boats a second time. Now the article, and I haven't, I don't really watch the TV news. I read the news. But the article doesn't say that Trump said, yeah, we're going to kill them all and kill them while they're swimming, for their lives. He doesn't say that. And he doesn't really accuse him of saying that. But there is something going on, and that is, if you watched Hegseth's speech to the military when he dragged all the senior people back and gave them a big talk, their theme is toughen up. In other words, you want to fight, you have to fight us. And we're very hard to fight.
And he's making it very unpredictable as to what we have and what we don't have. Last week he made the decision to sell China some chips that NVIDIA makes. That's their last generation chip, not their current Blackwell generation. I don't like that, but I also think he knows what he's doing, so I can't quite figure. I don't think I like that, but I don't know anything, so I'm not in a position to weigh that. I want to go back to the subject you brought up earlier, because we should talk about it. It became, no sooner was the ink dry on the Munich Agreement and the speech made in the vote of confidence that Great Britain began to build Spitfires and Hurricanes as fast as they could. And I am uncertain whether the advantage was gained by Great Britain in this period of time over what Germany did, but the planes they were turning out were certainly better than the ones that Germany was turning out. Am I correct in that?
Well, there's a big historical controversy about that, and lots of books have been written about it by some able people on both sides of the question. Was Britain stronger in September 1939 than it was in October 1938? The answer to that is certainly yes. Was it stronger relative to Germany over that period? That's the big matter of debate, because Germany was rolling too. Churchill makes the point in this chapter that if you start a big defense buildup, you get nothing after the first year. You get a little after the second year. You get a fair amount or a lot after the third year, and the fourth year there's a flood. And so Hitler was in his fourth year, and Britain was not. Britain was in its second year at most. So I don't know that. I know that serious people argue about that.
Well, there's one thing that isn't inarguable, and perhaps we'll end here, because it's about the war with Ukraine and Russia, as well as it is about the war that would follow Churchill's speech here. Quote, finally, there is this staggering fact, Churchill writes, that in the single year 1938, Hitler had annexed to the Reich and brought under his absolute rule 6,750,000 Austrians and 3,500,000 Sudetans, a total of over 10 millions of subjects, toilers, and soldiers. Indeed, the dread balance had turned in his favor. In the end, it takes people, and he grabbed 10 million of them, and Great Britain didn't. That tells, and I think it's also the story of Central Europe right now. Am I correct? That Russia just has more men than Ukraine does.
Yeah, a lot more. And let's say that recent news doesn't make you think that Ukraine is governed entirely in the public interest.
That's charitable. That's actually very charitable.
Yeah. It's Germany had a weak hand in January 1933 when Hitler became chancellor. It had been working, by the way, since 1918, with the Soviet Union included, to rebuild its armaments to escape the treaty. But it wasn't very far along and still kept up the public persona of obeying the treaty. But then, so it's, 1933, January, till, September 39, when the war breaks out. That's 6 years and a bit. Germany was transformed in that time. It really had the whip hand in Europe. Against any power in Europe, it had overwhelming might, any single power. It proved to call in against itself enemies with a multiple of its power. And that was the strategic mistake of Hitler. But he was deluded by the ease with which he got away with so. Because think of the steps, right? He starts renouncing treaties, then he puts military force in the Rhineland, which he has a treaty obligation not to do, and he starts building the Siegfried Wall. And then then Austria, then Czechoslovakia, then Poland. And he got rid of all of that up through and including Czechoslovakia. And meanwhile, he's been revolutionizing the German economy to produce weapons. So he's just transformed the situation.
And he's got 5 new high school classes of graduates. What I was getting back to is ultimately population wins wars if you're going to fight them on land. And it doesn't matter so much at sea, but it matters a lot on land. It will never not matter on land how many people you have. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn.
Hello, this is Jeremiah Regan, and I have some great news. We've brought Hillsdale's incredibly popular free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. The Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast brings you our online courses in their entirety, with courses ranging from ancient history and biblical epics to foundational political principles and the future of American citizenship. Follow the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Arnn, we went to break. We were talking about what wins wars on land. It's always population. You got to have people. And right now, Europe is declining in population so rapidly. I believe Spain's at 1.2. The reproduction rate is 2.1. The United States is holding steady at 2.1. Russia is down. Ukraine. Basically, Israel, the 4 is the new 3. Every Israeli is having 4 children, and they are a healthy country. Do you think those numbers spell doom for Europe because they're just not reproducing Europeans? Well,
the first step to having a happy population is to have a population.
Yes.
and remember, one of the things that people don't quite understand, you and I are old now, and so we know about the passing of our parents. And we know that they need us in their great age as we needed them in our great young age.
Yes.
Who's going to take care of the other people? And maybe Elon is going to produce generations of robots that are going to take care of the old people. But who's going to control those robots? Because, like, my dad, who's a figure of strength and maturity to me, I'm his son, right? At the end, he needed my help. And somebody who loves him, because, there were people around him who might have exploited him. And I put a stop to that. And I intervened once after my mother died in a relationship he had with a woman. He was an old man. It wasn't an improper relationship. But he said, I said, Dad, I'm not trying to drive her away. If I want to do that, I can. I said, but I'm taking care of you. And you can write me a letter. You'd have to put it in writing and tell me that you don't want my help ever. And I said, I will respect that. But I happen to know that you are not going to write me that letter.
That's not fair. I'm going to remember that. Well, I don't have to remember that because my parents are gone too. But I hope my daughter doesn't hear this because she'll send me that letter. On that note, I don't want to get that letter from my commandante daughter who's in charge of everything. But Dr. Arnn, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you. We will talk live next in 2026. May your New Year's be happy and your celebrations bright and merry, and the college a great place to get some rest for you and Mrs. Arnn. You certainly do deserve it after a semester, and I appreciate your friendship as always. Have a Happy New Year to you.
I got you here. You too. All the way.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.